front landing gear for the Tornado. So the frame is upside down right now, so everything's in reverse into the drawings. So we have the two thrust bearings, one that goes on the bottom, one that goes on the inside. So what I did is I started with the one that goes on the bottom here and put it in place. Required trimming the edges down, so I just used some snips to trim the corners because there's some welds inside here that this wouldn't fit down, and then it was a little bit snug, so I wanted to sit so it was nice and flat inside. Also adjusted it forward and backwards, side to side, so that the bearing actually is exposed. So we want the shaft to actually ride on the bearing, on the plastic, and not on the metal. And so I got as close as I could, and then also made some adjustments for the washers that will be on here, as well as the heads of the rivets on both sides, so that the steering arm on the inside and the landing gear thrust lock nut there rides on this on the outside, and it's going to be able to spin without hitting the heads of the rivets. So made sure that there was gaps on all the sides for that. Then I took the inside one and put it on the inside, did the same thing to that one, and measured it inside so that it would fit perfectly. So got that all done. I drilled the top holes first, so I drilled the holes coming down from the top for this top one here to make sure that everything was clear on this side, and then I drilled the bottom one second. So to double check, they're drilled out at number 30 for the, and I have marks on here to indicate which way is towards the rear of the fuselage and the front. And we throw some Clecos in, and that holds those nice and tight. So then once those are sitting in here, you'll see there's gaps here and there. I did to clean the edges up. Took a little bit more time, but I wanted to do it correct. So, and then once we did that, checked the metal. The metal did rub. It came on just on the inside of the bearing, and so used a large file. I marked it, and then I filed that the metal piece back a little bit, maybe a 1/16, maybe an 1/8 of an inch, just back, so that there was just enough clearance that I could see the washer, the bearing, on the bottom and on the top. I just lifted it up like this so I could check on the inside to make sure that the plastic bearing is inside the metal, and that way when we put everything together, so this piece goes in this way on the inside. Steering fork comes in from on top, slides down and into the socket, and then the steering arm will be bolted up top. Once I get the right fork, I'm actually going to use a larger fork than this so that I can use a small tire and a large tire, and so that should be built for me hopefully while I'm down here in the next day or two. So once that's done, it'll get put into place. We'll mark it, drill the hole into the steering arm, and put a bolt in there, an AM417 bolt, and that'll be bolted, and that is the steering arm. So the rudder pedals will attach with arms, with metal arms to the steering arm, and then that will cause the nose wheel to turn, so it's a steerable nose wheel, and then that cable will also run all the way back to the rudder and control the rudder. So that is, this part is pretty much done for where we're at now, except for the riveting. So I'm going to rivet these into place, and then we'll be ready for the larger arm once I get it in there, and then the nose wheel will be completed. Titan Tornado main gear. Now we're working on mounting them to the airframe. These are the titanium gear legs, so they're actually a little bit smaller than the standard size. So there's two couplers on the gear legs that go inside the airframe. So the first step is going to be to put a couple of pieces of metal that I've cut out of the scrap bin to get the correct measurement for the 10-inch from the end of this piece to the frame tube, and then a longer piece that will go over and run down the side that will match up with the hole in the spindle and get everything lined up for the proper hole drilling, and we'll get that all ready. From this way, the instructions say to sight down the center of the spindle, and it's focusing on the wrong spot, but if you get inside, you can see the other gear leg, and the way that you tell that they're aligned properly is when you're looking through, you'll see equal light on both sides, and the other gear leg will mount directly down and not be off. So finishing up on the main gear, so tricycle gear. So in this case, we see a little bit of toe out on both wheels. That means the center line of the tire points out and away from the aircraft. The sighting method used previously, got it all lined up, was looking down the tube and then looking for that gear leg to be centered inside of the sight picture down the holes, like that one on the left. So both tires are set up, and then as a secondary, I laid the angle iron across the top, and that piece level, level. So the frame is level, the tires are level, so we know that both tires will contact the ground at about the same time. They both have about the same toe out. To verify my sight picture down the center of that tube, I put the rods in here, so they're sitting in the bottom, and they run through the spindle and out the spindle, and they come down. And so this one coming from that side is the same thing. It goes through, it sits out, and it runs all the way down, and it sits in the center of my tube. So that's exactly, that means that it's, the sight picture was pretty good, just confirms my sight picture. The other one that comes out comes down and meets the other rod. It's a little bit off just because it's balanced, but when it was sitting, it's squared up. And then I've already pulled them both out and done the same thing the other direction. So that is, they're all lined up. I've double checked my measurements. The pieces of paper were for sighting, just to give me a background. But on this side, this piece of scrap was butted up tight against the spindle and then held in place, same with the tape and the bands. I also marked on this side where the first collar is, that first bushing, so it's here to there, and then the second one is here, so there's a hole, and that's where the hole is when this was laying flat. So I'm going to drill a small hole here into to make sure that it is lined up, and then drill through, and then I'll enlarge that hole to match the correct size for the bolts. And I'll do the exact same thing on this side over there. So that's the next stage. So looking at it this way, the right gear, I've got the first bolt drilled to match the collar that's on the inside. I'll do the same on the left side here. Start with so center punch here, use small bits and work my way up just to make sure that I find the center of the hole, and then drill through, and we'll get that other bolt in. And just like that, main pin is done. So now I'll transfer my marks here for the other upper tube. I'm going to pull these out, clean those up, make the measurements here, figuring out where I've got to put the bolt, and then we'll be good. So we're putting the left gear in, so we've got the holes lined up. The first bushing goes in, the second bushing goes into about right there. And then if we look right there, we can get that hole lined up. With this lined up, we drop the bolt in. I'm going to only use a smaller bolt here just for ease right now. And once that bolt's in place, got the nut on tight, already did some measurements, so I know exactly how far inside that upper collar is, that bushing. So it is marked, so I know where the edges are, which is where that piece of tape is the bottom edge. And this black mark here is the upper edge. There's a small scrap, and taped it on so it's flush and square and runs down. And based on where I need my bolt to go through to miss all the pipes and everything on the front and the back, I made a mark there and did a center punch, and then with this right here made a mark so the end is exactly centered, and then that black line is where, when it's taped down, where it touches. So then what I did is I pulled it out, laid this flat right here, made some marks so I knew where it was going to be, and I verified that that was not going to be a problem with the pin. Here's the pin that holds that collar in place so it won't rotate. We'll slide it back into place. Put the bolt in, tighten it up, lifted this out of the way, and drilled that hole. Just enough so that it made a small divot. So that it made a small divot right there. I'll take this entire leg off, back to the drill press, and then drill through and get that to the right size, and then bring it back up here, and then drill all the way through and size it up. So finished up getting the main gear installed last night. And they're all drilled out and everything looks good. We flipped it over this morning so it's upright.